So for the last couple of days around here, quite a few of folks from our ministry and eight other New Thought and Christian spiritual communities joined us in a process of learning about something called the Transformation Experience, which is about creating vibrant community-centered ministries, and we're beginning to follow that process here as one of the training hubs for this amazing program that has been developed by our guest speaker. Dr. Gary Simmons has been in the Unity movement for a while, several decades, as a minister and later as a director of peacemaking services and director of integral services for Unity, what's now called Unity Worldwide Ministries. And he's the author of a couple of books, number of books actually, and one of them, The Eye of the Storm, it's the letter I. The Eye of the Storm is about peacemaking and conflict management. He's also been in martial arts for a long time. He's a 4th degree black belt in martial arts, so hug at your own risk. And in his spare time, he builds and flies airplanes. Builds and flies, so he must have some confidence in his building ability, because then he gets in them and flies them, so that's something to say. So I'm really happy to have him here and to call him a good friend and to introduce Dr. Gary Simmons.
You rock. You rock. I got to tell you, I travel all over the country and visit New Thought churches everywhere, and everywhere I go, there's an apparent kind of way of doing things in all the ministries, and the way you do your ministry is awesome. I mean, I walked into Dr. Jim's office, and you know what happened? I saw Lane Taylor come up to him and tell him what the order of service was. That never happens. That never happens. Wow, this is just great. Just to be able to witness how it's possible that the entire community comes together and creates this experience, and then you let Jim say whatever he wants to say. That's awesome. Well, let me begin with a little survey. How many of you are dealing with a difficult life situation right now? Please raise your hand. Okay. And how many of you know of someone who is dealing with a difficult life situation? All right, that's everybody. That's good. We got everybody now. Now let me ask you this question, a very important question. Where is the difficulty really in a difficult life situation? Point to it. Now don't point to your spouse. So let me just check in. So when you're pointing to yourself, what you're saying is that the difficulty in a difficult life situation is really about how we are being with what we're having as our life experience, as opposed to how our life experience is with us. That's what you're saying. And if that's what you really mean, you have a very unique perspective, because most of the world believes that the difficulty in a difficult life situation is in the experience itself. Now, when we make the mistake of believing that the difficulty is out there, then we are compelled to have things be a certain way. Is that not true? Have you ever had to have things be a certain way before? Go ahead, raise your hand. It's just a fur ball. Cough it up. It's okay. Whenever we have to have things be a certain way, God says, I can't work with you. You know, God's Italian. Whenever we need something to be a certain way because we don't feel okay or safe, we collapse the field of infinite possibilities, you see. And God needs to have every single possibility equally accessible for the activity of spirit to unfold in our life. And if we just don't want this because we don't feel okay, we may be closing the portal of our highest good. Can you see how that's so? Can you see how that's so? You know, and so it's really up to us to realize that the source of our discomfort and the source of our well-being is not out there. but in here, inside. And when we have really clearly understood and are really clear about that the power is not out there to make us happy or unhappy, the power is right inside. When we can make that clarity really apparent to us, then we open up the arena of possibilities and we reclaim our power, because now we can look at who we are being with what we're having, because that's where we are either being who we truly are, being who we've come here to be, or being who we are not. And who are you not? Who are we not? Well, let me just give you a little example. How many of you have ever had to be right before? Anybody? Just raise your hand. Okay, so who do you have to be in order to need to be right? I mean, just imagine someone judges you and you feel defensive, you get triggered, and then you show up trying to be right. That's sort of how the dynamic might happen. But what is that need to be right really connected to? Ego. It may be connected to some sense of inadequacy. Have you ever had any inadequacy before? It may be connected to some sense of unworthiness. Anybody ever have any unworthiness before? Sure. So when we are being our inadequacy or being our unworthiness, that's how it's possible that our life can look and feel against us sometimes. Because our inadequacy is not the truth of us. It's something we believe that we have within us. Our unworthiness is not the truth of us, but it's something that we acquired. You know, our inadequacy, our unworthiness, feeling not good enough, feeling less than, all of these things are BS. Belief system. Well, you thought I meant something else? We acquired those beliefs about ourselves. The little boy or little girl in us picked up those beliefs. Because Mary and Joseph weren't our parents, we didn't get from our caregivers that we were the Christ of God, the Christ unto our world. And instead, when what we needed was to be loved or safe, and if something happened that didn't take place when we were very, very little, and because we had no context, because our cognitive development was not at a place where we could really understand the distinction between what we're having as our life experience and what we're experiencing within ourselves, those two were connected together so completely that we took on the belief that I'm not okay, I'm not lovable, when we didn't get the love or protection that we needed. Can you see how that's possible? Can you see how that's the truth? And so when our life looks and feels against us, it's really a mirror unto that part of ourself that is living in a disconnect. Can you see how that's so? There's a part of us, a little boy or little girl inside, that is still reaching out for the love and the acceptance and the protection that it needs. But when we are in our life believing that there's something or someone out there that's really against us, and not realizing that it's really a mirror unto that place within ourselves, then we make the mistake of trying to manage what's happening in our life, and that's almost impossible. What did you do when you got up this morning? You probably looked into a mirror. Anybody not look into a mirror this morning? See, it's a universal, yes, one person over there admitted that, and thank you for your honesty. It's a ritual that all of us do in Western society. But what did you do when you looked into the mirror? You tried to fix it, didn't you? Well, not the mirror, of course. You didn't put makeup on the mirror. And why would you fix you anyway? Well, because you're probably uncomfortable with what got reflected back. Well, it's interesting because when we're uncomfortable with what's getting reflected back to us with respect to what we're having as our life experience, we try to fix the mirror instead of looking and reflecting on how we are showing up. Are we showing up in our way of being with our life experience, being our inadequacy, being our unworthiness, being not good enough? Because if we are, our life has to expose that. And it exposes that by looking and feeling as if it's against us. That's the shadow effect. When we source our well-being or our discomfort out there, instead of recognizing that it arises from within, we are driven. Our default operating system is running the show. And so we're compelled to push away. We're compelled to blame. We're compelled to control. We're compelled to have things be a certain way. But that compulsion lives inside of us and has less to do with what's going on out there. You know, I once had a young student who was testing for his first-degree black belt. And my tradition was to ask a young person, what does your black belt represent? What does it symbolize? And so Scott, who's 9 years old, says this: before I was a black belt, when I got into a fight, I had to fight because I was afraid. But now that I'm a black belt, I can walk away. And for a 9-year-old to get that there's a distinction between being in a challenging, threatening situation and being afraid, having to fight, but if one can be connected to a different metaphor of one's well-being, which is what the black belt represents, there's a different resourcefulness, a different way of expressing oneself in life. In the 30 years that I've taught and practiced martial arts, I've broken all my fingers, my toes, my wrist. I've had 5 broken ribs. I've been knocked out. I've been stabbed. I've been choked unconscious. I've been to the emergency room 3 times to be sewn up. All in the practice of martial arts. I've never been attacked. Similarly, as a minister, I've had my back stabbed, my butt kicked, my ego bruised. I've been raked over the coals. I've been pounced on. Have you ever told somebody that you were attacked? You're stabbed in the back? I think it's important for us to recognize that if we're putting out there the vibration that that's where the unsafe, that's where the danger is, and not recognize the contribution that we are feeding into this field, then we need to remember that we are helping to co-create what is happening in our world. Now, it's not to say that there aren't horrific things happening in the world. You know, we do have this principle in Science of Mind. There's only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. In unity, it's one presence and one power at work in my life, God the good, omnipotent. And then there are the exceptions. Do you have exceptions to the principle that there's just God? And what are those exceptions really? Those exceptions are really about our own past hurts, our own issues, the failures, the misfortunes that we've had. That's what those exceptions sort of land in. But we need to understand that we acquire some of those hurts and some of those ills because of how we're being with our experience as opposed to how our experience is being with us. And so it's important for us to begin to understand that the events and circumstances out there that don't look and feel good are consequences of the disconnect, as opposed to a dynamic, a power. You know, it would be much better if we had a 2-power principle, wouldn't it? God and the devil. But we don't. We have to be in the struggle of managing how our life looks and feels with the truth that the truth of us is that we're divine. And how do we reconcile that? Well, the way we reconcile that is to realize that that little boy or little girl inside still needs the love and protection that it must have in order to let go of the belief that I'm not good enough, that I'm not lovable. And guess who has to give that little boy or little girl that love and that protection? It's grown-up Gary that has to do that. Because that's the only way that I'm going to be able to let go of my sense of unworthiness, is to be able to recognize that I don't have to continue to allow that to be a part of my creative process. You know, in Scripture, there is a teaching that you'll find in Matthew chapter 5, verses 42 and 43. And I'm going to quote the attributed words to Jesus, and I'm going to use the King James Version, the version that Jesus used. Didn't use the King James Version, but and he describes a way in which we can dismantle the shadow effect, the dynamic of believing and compelled to therefore do something about what's happening in our life, and instead begin to work with that part of ourself that needs healing, that part of ourself that needs integration, that part of ourself that needs to be aligned with the truth of who and what we've come here to be. And so he talks about an enemy, and I'm wanting you to think about an enemy that you might have in your life right now. Your enemy can be your body, an illness, a disability, your self-image. An enemy can be a life situation, something that's going on in your life. Your enemy can be an interpersonal difficulty. And you know you're in relationship with an enemy, or you're caught up in the shadow effect when you have to have things be a certain way, when you're defensive, when you're needing, when you're making somebody the matter with you, when you're a victim, when you're blaming. All of those behaviors are symptomatic of you being in this way of with your life as if it's against you. That's the enemy. And he gave us a way of dismantling that dynamic. Would you like to know how to dismantle that dynamic? So listen to this, because this teaching, this instruction is for a certain part of you. And I want you to sort of have a sense of what part this teaching is meant to speak to. So here goes. He says this: love your enemies. Bless those that curse you. Do good to those that hate you. Pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you, so you may be called children of your Father which is in heaven. So this is a teaching not for our head, right? It's a teaching for our heart. Because love your enemy, what's up with that? You know, that's what our head says. Our head gathers all the evidence as to why things are the way they are, and creates the rationale for the strategies, the coping strategies that we have. But you see, loving the enemy is about being present to the moment, because it's a portal into that little boy or little girl that needs healing. And if we're pushing this away, then we close down that portal. We don't have access to that part of ourself that needs healing. And besides, loving is not about the head. I mean, it's about the heart. I mean, you never said to somebody, "I love you with all my head." No. The heart yearns to love, to forgive, to accept, to embrace. And when we allow ourselves to be present to what we're having as our experience, and not let the discomfort of the moment cause us to impulsively, reactively push this away, or make this the source, when instead we be with the experience, because it's a portal into that part of ourself that needs healing and integration and wholeness, then we begin to move closer to reconnecting with our power. Next, Jesus says, bless those that curse you. Once again, this is not a teaching for the head. The head just can't get around giving thanks and being in gratitude for the difficulty, the challenge, the discomfort in the moment. But this is what the heart does. This is what is hardwired within us, the capacity to be in the experience knowing that it is for us. It could be said to bless a situation, which means to endow the situation with a capacity to be good in our life, is the highest expression of our faculty of faith. Can you see that? Can you get to that place where you can understand that there's a part of us, that presence of heart and love and acceptance, that out of which that sense of knowing that life is good comes from? Because our head is simply looking at all the horrific things that are happening out there in the world. Next, Jesus says, do good to those that hate you. Once again, the head says, no way. Instead of doing good, I'm going to get even, or I'm going to do something that's going to sort of balance out the scales. But what Jesus is giving us insight into is that our role in being and our purpose for being here is to be the way of God, the activity of Spirit. And so the good that we need to be doing is being the expression of God, to do the right thing instead of needing to be right. And then finally Jesus says, pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. Okay, now our head is a little bit more happy. Now it gets into that moment. I can say, oh, dear God, please get this out of my life. But you see, that's not the prayer that Jesus wanted us to pray. But what was the prayer that Jesus prayed from the cross? Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. You see, I can only be diminished by what I'm having as my life experience when I am not connected to the truth of who I am. Can you see how that's possible? And my offender can only hurt me when he or she is not connected to the truth of who they are. So the ills of the world are a consequence of the disconnect. And when we clearly understand that, and clearly understand that the source of our well-being and the source of our discomfort are within, then we can begin to understand what that discomfort's really about. There's two things that discomfort's connected to. It's connected to being who we are not, being our inadequacy, being our unworthiness, being not good enough with what we're having as our life experience, or our suffering, our discomfort's connected to confusing ourself with what we're having as our life experience. So what do I mean by that? For instance, we all have a body, but have you ever confused yourself with your body, believing that your body is you? And when our body is in some state that doesn't feel like it's the way we want it to be, then we suffer. But that suffering is because we've created an identity out of what we're having as our life experience. You know, when my book was first published about 11 years ago, my previous wife, was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And she read the book. The primary message of the book is, nothing and no one is against you. And she took that book and she threw it at me and she said, this is a bunch of crap. She said, how can you say that nothing and no one is against me when I'm dying? I'm dying. And yes, it's very, very difficult for us to sort of reconcile and sort out what we're having as our experience, especially when it's not good or seemingly so, with the truth. But she was able to arrive at a place where she could be in the experience of having a dying body and not be diminished by it, because she knew that she was not her body, that she was so much more. And because she was able to make that shift, she became radiant and luminous, especially at the moment of her last breath. And everyone who was connected to her as a part of her caregiving, as a part of supporting her through her process, every one of those individuals were healed by her, healed by that demonstration. I am not my body. I am not my beliefs. I am not my story. I am not what I'm having as my life experience. But my life experience is something that I can use, because of who and what I have come here to be. And every life experience, every moment that enters into our life is grist for the millstone of our unfolding. And as we really remember the truth of who we are and think about our teachings and our practice and understand, yes, it's a challenge sometimes to reconcile the truth, our principles, with what's happening out there in the world, but if we don't do that, who will? Who will? So, as I want to sort of wrap this up for everyone right now, I just want to say that there's are you familiar with the Tao, the Asian principle, the Tao, the way? That there is this internal stream of intentionality that is seeking to fulfill itself. And when we step into that stream, then we're carried to where we need to journey. And when we release ourselves to the activity of Spirit, our good makes its way into our life. Well, while nothing and no one is against you, everyone's in your way. God bless you.